Chapter 28, The Crystal Palace. June 29th, 2086. Arcadia Bay, Oregon. The Stormbreakers marched double file through the underground cavern, using flashlights and Quarter's plasma sword to light the way. At any moment they expected to find the back of the cave, but it just kept sloping downhill, going deeper and deeper into the darkness. Quarter, being half feline, found navigating the dark passageways to be very easy. Her whiskers twitched on each movement of the air, and her eyes rapidly focused on the smallest of movements. Setla, by contrast, was having a hard time. He was nearly as tall as the cavern itself, and he kept brushing his head against the ceiling. Nainu regularly clambered down from Varian's shoulders to check on his reptilian comrade. Kingi and Maui were much more interested in the tunnel itself rather than its destination. Kingi brushed his hands against the rocky wall while Maui scanned it with his smart glasses. After about an hour and a half of walking in silence, Maui made an announcement. "Guys, this cave is not natural." "Oh really?" Quarter said. "What gave it away? The fact that it just keeps going on forever?" Maui unsheathed his own plasma sword and activated it. Greenish-blue light flickered from the blade as he held it close to the walls. "Look at how smooth the walls are," Maui said. "This tunnel was dug with an industrial machine, judging from the way the soil is settled, between 60 and 70 years ago." Varian did the math in his or her head. "So that means this was done during the occupation," Varian concluded. "So did Advent dig this out? There's no way the Resistance would have access to stuff like excavators back then." Setla spoke up. "Now hold on. I remember reading in history books that XCOM had a series of underground bases at the beginning of the war. Could this be one of them?" Setla asked. Everyone looked at Varian, who shook their head. "No way," Varian replied. "The closest XCOM base is Site X, and that's in southern Nevada, about 600 miles from here. I'm starting to think we're heading towards one of the old Advent Black sites. My grandfather, Blake, he blew one to hell during the war. He said it was hidden away in the middle of nowhere, and that's basically where we are now." "An Advent Black site hidden away in the mountains," Kingi mused. "It would make sense if that was the case. I heard the sacred coil would take over old Advent bases and turn them into cathedrals." "Oh shit, you're right," Varian said. "Maybe we're about to walk into whatever's left of sacred coil." "Yeah, right," Quarter snorted. "I heard they fell to bits after Bellis Mar was killed by the UN. We might find a couple of devotees, but they're no cult of Jericho." The team pressed on, moving deeper into the tunnel. There were no branches or tributaries, just a single path into the darkness. There were a few indications that the elevation was changing. Varian, Maui, and Kingi all had to pop their ears as the air pressure changed. The Stormbreakers had no way to know how long their march took them beneath the mountains of Oregon, but eventually hunger and exhaustion set in, and everyone agreed to stop and rest. The team had set out from Arcadia Bay in such a hurry that only a small amount of food and water was available. Each Stormbreaker had a single meal and 2 bottles of water in their packs. But instead of digging in, the group sat down to pool their food and water, and then ration it out reasonably. Each species had their own dietary requirements, and the Stormbreakers distributed their supplies to make sure everyone was accommodated. Nainu and Setla, being reptiles, could survive up to a month without a proper meal. Nainu could also snack on insects, but without fruit he would be miserable. The humanoids, Varian, Maui, and Kingi, could survive for roughly 3 weeks, and even longer with rationing. The most urgent need was Quarter. As a half-Levakian, her body had a very high metabolism. Like all other Levakians, Quarter would not be able to survive without food for more than a few days. On Varian's direction, all high-protein meats were given to Quarter, who accepted the food with a kind of grim seriousness. She knew that if things went south and the supplies ran out, she would be the first to perish. As everyone dug into their dinner rations, Quarter and Maui looked at one another. The Partogan and half-Levakian were thinking about how their own ancestors would have fared during the Wars of the Famine hundreds of years ago. After the short meal, everyone found a stretch of tunnel floor and tried to get some sleep. Setla and Nainu both curled up alongside Quarter, using her fur-covered body for warmth. Nainu yawned and then pressed his face into Quarter's flank, losing himself to a troubled sleep. Sometime later, Nainu was awoken by a rustling sound. He sat upright. There was something moving around in the tunnel, but he was not sure what it was. Nainu's first thought was that somebody was sleepwalking. He knew that humanoids were liable to do such a thing. "Maui?" Nainu quietly called out. "Varian? Kingi?" No one answered. Whatever was shuffling around also stopped moving. It knew it was caught. After a moment, a noise drifted out of the darkness. A feline growling. Nainu realized this was a stranger and quickly stood up, reaching for his laser pistol. "Who's there?" Nainu called out. "I warn you, I'm armed!" Nainu found his laser pistol and powered it on. The weapon barrel started to glow, and a dull red light filled the cavern. All around Nainu, the other 5 Stormbreakers were somehow managing to sleep through this racket. Meanwhile, a wildcat froze in the light, looking up at Nainu. The animal was roughly the same size as Nainu and had messy brown fur and yellow eyes. Nainu was puzzled to see that this newcomer was not casting a shadow. The light from Nainu's weapon simply passed through the wildcat as though it was not even there. But perhaps most strangely of all was what was riding on the creature's back. Waving its wings ever so gently was the blue butterfly. What happened next is difficult to describe in words. An unspoken conversation passed between Nainu and the wildcat. Somehow, Nainu was able to understand the animal completely. Quickly, Nainu scrambled to wake the other Stormbreakers. "Everyone up!" he yelled. "We have to move out, now!" "What's the emergency?" Kingi said, bolting upright. "We need to follow that animal," Nainu said, pointing down the tunnel. "She's going to show us the way." Everyone stared in the direction Nainu was pointing. "There's no one down there," Maui said, adjusting his smart glasses. "No life signs at all." Varian, however, reached into his or her pocket and pulled out the psionic energy detector they stole from the UN earlier. Varian looked down at the tool and their eyebrows shot up. "Guys," Varian said, "I'm detecting psionic energy down the tunnel. So much the needle is going off the scale. We should follow Nainu." The team quickly scrambled to their feet and followed after Nainu, while Nainu followed the lead of a creature only he could see. The wildcat led the group even further underground. As they went, the temperature rose. It was getting very hot, and the laser weapons only made things worse. One by one, everyone powered down their laser rifles, until the only source of light came from plasma swords held aloft by Quarter and Kingi. Varian asked Nainu to describe the creature leading them on, but before Nainu got a chance to reply, there was a noise. A deep, booming voice echoed its way up the corridor, like a roll of thunder. "You have come far, little humans, boldly pushing forth into the unknown. If only you knew the truth of this place, you would scurry back to the shadows from where you were spawned." Weapons were drawn and powered up. Nainu looked around at his comrades. "Wait, you all heard that?" "You're damned right we did," Quarter said. "Do you hear the weapons fire too?" Straining his ears, Nainu realized that he could, in fact, hear the sound of laser and Gauss weapons echoing up the tunnel. Somewhere, not too far ahead, a gunfight was playing out. Everyone looked at Nainu, who in turn looked at the Wildcat. "We have to go on," Nainu said. "How do we know this isn't a trap?" Setla complained. The team pressed on, following the creature until they came upon a massive chamber. The tunnel widened out and became a great cavern. Unlike the tunnels that came before, this place was very well lit, and decorated like one of the Occupation-era Advent cathedrals, with ornate gold and silver plating on the walls, ceiling, and floor. And in the midst of this suddenly grand setting, there was a huge slab of solid Illyrium, standing almost 30 feet in height. And a battle was raging around it. A group of humans was locked in combat against a group of aliens, all battling viciously for control of the monolith in the center of the room. Gunfire left the opulent decor in smoldering ruin while blood streamed over the floor. Red for the humans, yellow for the aliens. Standing atop a smashed altar, a tall and muscular alien with purple skin taunted the attacking humans. "Come to me! Like a moth to flame, you will be consumed by my brilliance." Quarter, Nainu, Setla, Kingi, and Maui all raised their weapons, ready to join the fight. "We should help the Xenos," Quarter said. "They might be from the Galactic Defense Force." "Agreed," Maui said. "Let's give the UN something to cry about." But before the Stormbreakers could join the battle against the humans, Varian leapt forward and blocked the way, arms outstretched. "Guys, stop!" "Varian, move out of the way!" Setla boomed. "We have to help the GDF before the humans wipe them out." "That's not the GDF, and those guys are not blueheads," Varian said. "Look closer. It's Advent and XCOM." The Stormbreakers hesitated. Quarter took another look at the purple alien who was leading the defenders. Then, in a moment of realization, she gasped. "Holy Mother of Jericho! That's..." Now that Quarter said something, everyone looked at the alien leader. The tall, purple, muscle-bound alien was not fighting with a weapon. He reached out with his hands and engaged his enemies with psionic attacks. Purple soul fire erupted from his body like a flamethrower and engulfed the underground battle space in an inferno. One by one, all of the Stormbreakers remembered their history lessons. Nainu remembered seeing a gallery of pictures that depicted military leaders from the Second Hyperspace War. Maui remembered absent-mindedly flipping through a history textbook at school. Setla remembered seeing the alien's face on television. The alien leader who lashed out with soulfire was none other than Khan Mom Desurik, the Elder's chosen warlock. But, Maui stammered. "He's been dead for 50 years! "My grandparents knew the guy who killed him," Varian said. "Grandpa Blake and Grandma Chihiro were friends with Bernard von Unfall." "And there he is!" Varian pointed towards one of the human combatants. A skinny German man with a gaunt face charged across the battlescape, gunning down a sectoid before turning his weapon against the chosen warlock. "Have we gone back in time?" Kingi asked. "No," Varian said. "I think I know what's going on here. Grandma Chihiro told me about this. When a powerful psionic being dies, they leave some of their psionic energy behind." Nainu quickly turned his attention to the Wildcat, who was standing very close to the battle, but did nothing to acknowledge the Gauss rounds and laser bolts zipping past. Nainu and the Wildcat locked eyes again, and a silent message passed between them. "This is the place where the devil sleeps," Nainu said in a cryptic tone. He pointed to a point on the far side of the room, where the blue butterfly was circling around a second tunnel entrance. Standing there, waiting for the Stormbreakers, was a four-legged creature that Nainu could not make out from here. He gulped and turned to face the other Stormbreakers. We have to cross, he told them. What? Quarter said. You want us to just walk through an active battle zone? We'll be killed in the crossfire. Crossfire of what? Nainu said. This battle happened 50 years ago. It's an echo, a reflection of the past. It's probably playing out in our minds, and nothing is happening at all. Now let's go! Without waiting for the others, Nainu leapt out of the tunnel and started scurrying his way across the cathedral of the Chosen Warlock. Varian swore. Follow him and don't engage, he ordered. The Stormbreakers broke into a run, following Nainu straight through the middle of the battle. To them, everything felt and looked very real. Setla's ears twitched as Gauss rounds flew by his head. Kingi slipped on some blood. Then, when the team was about halfway across the chamber, the monolith in the center of the room suddenly cracked and splintered, sending Illyrium shards flying across the room. Quarter was struck by a few small pieces and cried out, "This feels pretty real to me, you guys!" Seeing his precious artifact smashed to bits, the Chosen Warlock lost his composure and went berserk, screaming and shouting, "Ah! Impossible! The Elders! They are silent! Demons! I will destroy you for this outrage!" Desurik swept his hands downward, and a telekinetic force descended upon the chamber. All 6 Stormbreakers were swept off their feet. Varian, who had heard this story before, knew that they were less than a minute away from its ending. "Everyone on your feet!" Varian yelled. "We've got to move!" Only a few meters away, Bernard von Unfall, or rather his psionic echo, shouted the exact same words and grabbed for his laser rifle. Another wave of soul fire rippled across the chamber, and Quarter's tail caught fire. She screamed in panic, but Setla grabbed her around the middle and carried her along. "Keep going!" Varian shouted. "It's about to happen!" Behind him, the soldiers of XCOM regained the initiative, holding off a crew of Vipers, Mutons, Spectres, and Archons. The fighters bought just enough time for von Unfall to draw his weapon on the Chosen Warlock. Bernard fired twice, hitting Desurik once in the center of the chest and once in the forehead. The Chosen Warlock keeled over, dead. At that moment, the Stormbreakers reached the far side of the chamber. The tunnel entrance was on a ledge about 5 feet up. One by one, each member of the team clambered onto Setla's back, reached the top, and then turned around to help the next person. "Here it comes!" Varian called out. At that moment, the damaged monolith activated. Desurik's body vanished in a column of purple light, only to reappear moments later. The Chosen Warlock was alive, but the Illyrium sarcophagus had failed to heal his wounds. Mortally injured, Desurik staggered away from the sarcophagus, which was now shaking violently as though it would shatter apart at any second. At long last, Desurik coughed. "I hear their voice, unobstructed." Varian reached the ledge, and all 5 Stormbreakers turned around to grab Setla by the arms and pull him up. Meanwhile, von Unfall drew his arc blade and closed in toward the Chosen Warlock. Desurik did not see the XCOM soldier coming. He was looking to the ceiling as he fell to his knees, arms raised toward the heavens. They are so near!" the Chosen Warlock declared. "They are everywhere!" Starting at his feet and working upward from there, the body of the Chosen Warlock started to turn into stone. He was becoming a statue right there in the middle of the hall. Just as the Warlock's torso and arms were petrified, he gasped, "They come for me." Then Bernard von Unfall swung his sword. In one clean stroke, Konmon Desurik's head was severed from his shoulders. The remainder of his body turned to stone, and the Illyrium sarcophagus exploded. Varian pulled Setla into the tunnel just as a wave of debris and psionic energy crashed over the scene. For a moment, Varian was afraid that the shockwave would follow the Stormbreakers into the tunnel, but before any bits of debris could reach them, a shimmering haze filled the air, and as the Stormbreakers watched in disbelief, each and every bit of shrapnel that came flying towards them was incinerated by a psionic shield. Finally, there was silence again. The Stormbreakers peered out of the tunnel entrance and saw a completely different scene now. The Cathedral of the Chosen Warlock had been restored to the way it looked in the present day. Cold, dark, and abandoned. The gold and silver trimmings long stripped away, while a headless statue of Konmon Disurik languished in a corner, having been moved there by the progeny during their short stay in this place 50 years ago. There was no sign of the battle just witnessed. For all the Stormbreakers could tell, their crossing of the room was the first thing to have happened here in half a century. Turning back into the tunnel, Nainu was speaking to thin air once again. Nainu had finally come face to face with the creature he spotted earlier, a fully grown gray wolf. "Why can't my friends see you?" Nainu asked. "They were able to see and feel everything that happened in the last room." Maui pointed his laser rifle at the ceiling, allowing the glow of its barrel to light up the tunnel. The Stormbreakers, aside from Nainu, were still unable to see their mysterious guide. Just like the Wildcat, this wolf was not casting shadows. In fact, it left no footprints on the tunnel floor. The Stormbreakers could only watch as Nainu had a seemingly one-sided conversation with the wolf only he could see. "So, you are not a living creature of flesh and blood," Nainu said. "A psionic life form, like the ethereals or the people resurrected by Jericho." The wolf cocked its head to one side and regarded Nainu, its tail wagging vigorously. Then it turned around and began to walk up the tunnel, leading Nainu along. The rest of the Stormbreakers followed, still very confused. "So here's what I think is happening," Setla said. "Arcadia Bay is alive and is talking to Nainu via psionics. Does that sound right to you guys?" Quarter shrugged. "Dude, we have sentient plants and talking rocks in the Outer Limb. This is not as far-fetched as you make it sound," she said. "Yeah, but the Morbazak and Praku are at least kind enough to be visible," Kingi grumbled. "I wonder," Varian said, her or his voice trailing off. "Nainu's people worship their homeworld. They always say the planet Kelta is alive and has feelings. Maybe, if Jericho didn't destroy the gift, Nainu might have been, I don't know, predisposed to have psionic connections to the Earth." "Now that is far-fetched," Quarter said. The tunnel began to slope upwards. In the distance, a tiny pinprick of light could be seen. Nainu jogged to keep up with the wolf. The tunnel was rising up very steeply. Panting and sweating, the Stormbreakers followed Nainu until they came to another open chamber. This time, Varian did not need to explain what this was. The previous chamber gave away the existence of this one. The team had emerged inside the fortress of the Chosen Warlock, and the light was coming from a hole XCOM had blown in the ceiling 50 years ago. The moon and stars shone brightly, lighting up the wreckage below. One more time, the Stormbreakers carried out a team climbing exercise, extracting themselves from the hole in the ground one by one until everybody was standing outside once more. For the first time in what felt like days, everyone breathed in fresh mountain air and took in the beautiful sight of the sky above. Maui was the first to look at their surroundings. "What the?" he gasped. "Where are we?" Looking around, the team began to appreciate just how far they had traveled. The Arcadia Bay coastline was gone. Now, instead, the Stormbreakers were standing on an island in the middle of a glassy lake. The lake itself was smooth and calm, and in every direction they looked, the shoreline of the lake was made up by tall, rocky mountains. The island itself was cone-shaped, rising up to a summit that appeared flat until one stood on its edge, only to see the familiar indentation that betrayed the presence of a dormant volcano. Nainu, however, had eyes for something on the island's western shoreline. A beautiful, glittering structure stood on the shore. Varian took one look at it and was instantly reminded of European crystal palaces. It was very out of place on an uninhabited island, surrounded by wilderness on all sides. The building was also lit up from the inside, and it shone more brightly than the moon. Nainu turned to face the Stormbreakers. "That is the prison," he said. "We have to go there." It was a mark of how much the team had grown to trust Nainu and how much faith they had in his abilities that nobody objected. June 30th, 2086. Crater Lake, Oregon. There was only one way into the Crystal Palace, a grand door made from large panes of frosted glass. As the Stormbreakers approached, Nainu spotted the doe from earlier. It was curled up on the ground, quietly watching the same butterfly from earlier. As Nainu approached, the doe, butterfly, wolf, and wildcat all locked eyes with him. The four animals lowered their heads in a mournful way, and then they turned. One by one, each creature moved away from the light and warmth of the Crystal Palace before vanishing into the cold darkness of the surrounding night. Nainu looked at his comrades. "Okay," he said. "I'm ready. Let's go." The Stormbreakers stepped across the threshold, and as soon as they entered the Crystal Palace, a voice spoke from above. A voice everyone could hear. "Sometimes, all I want to do is shut my eyes and tell the world to go to hell." The Stormbreakers froze. Instinctively, Corridor tried to turn around and leave the way she came in, but she discovered the door was gone. Only solid glass wall remained. Growling, Corridor put her claws on the glass, but Nainu said, "That's not going to work." The little lizard was shaking, almost vibrating from head to toe, and it was clear why. Varian looked down at his, or her, psionic energy detector. The device had gone haywire and was no longer working correctly. "Nainu," Varian said, "before, you called this place a prison. This isn't an actual building, is it?" "No," Nainu said. "We are inside a psionic prison. We've fallen into some kind of telepathic trap, and there's someone in here with us. The prisoner this very place was made for." "Prisoner?" Setla repeated. "Who builds a prison for just one person, psionic or otherwise?" "I have a hunch," Nainu said, "but I pray to the Homeworld that I am wrong." The only way to go was forward. The path through the Crystal Palace was just as narrow and cramped as the underground tunnels. But now, instead of the path being too dark, there was too much light. Every surface was shiny and reflective. It was like walking through a hall of mirrors, except the floors and ceilings were also mirrors. The Stormbreakers saw dozens of copies of themselves all around, and frequently walked into walls, unable to find their way. Setla quickly lost his temper and tried to smash a mirror, only to find that they were indestructible. The group had no choice but to move slowly and cautiously. After about 5 minutes of walking, the strange voice spoke again. "Fire blinds us, just like darkness. But darkness blinds with absence, with loss." It was the voice of a woman. Maui called back, "Hello? Who's there?" At once, a fire erupted just in front of the Stormbreakers. But this was not like the wildfire that appeared in the forests around Arcadia Bay. This was soul fire. Bright green flames burned so brightly that every wall was blinding. Nainu jammed his eyes shut and yelled, "Blow through! Go right through it!" The Stormbreakers ran, as fast as they could, through the soul fire. As the heat died away, Corder opened her eyes and dared to look back. The Emerald Inferno was gone as quickly as it had arrived. "Another illusion?" she asked. Maui took off his smart glasses. For some reason, they had stopped working. Nainu said this was a telepathic trap. Perhaps we affected it by expecting the fire to be fake. "Maybe," Nainu started to say. But at that moment, there was a shuffling sound, and someone dove on top of him from above. The Stormbreakers screamed in panic as they were suddenly ambushed from all sides. One assailant for each member of the team appeared, and desperate hand-to-hand combat began. After just a few seconds of frantic punching, kicking, clawing, biting, and blocking, the Stormbreakers realized they were in a fight for their lives against opponents who simply should not have been there. Every single one of their attackers was a historical figure from the Second Hyperspace War. Nainu was attacked by the famed Celt engineer Dolim Dehuri. The two lizards grappled furiously, each trying to suffocate the other. Corder was nearly overwhelmed as the Lavakian queen Nomsa pounced on her. Nomsa slashed Corder with her forward claws, drawing blood. Maui ducked and weaved as Kailani Kalili, a Partogan madwoman, assailed him with a flurry of attacks, cackling and laughing as she went along. Setla held his hands over his eyes, trying to save himself from Ripi Imvu. The colorful Vanian flew in circles above the giant Mycor and dove, clawing at Setla's face with his talons. Kingi was grabbed from behind by Temirjan. He reached for his weapon, but the Ashurian warrior was faster and locked arms with his own. And finally, Varian found himself, or herself, fighting their own grandmother. Chihiro Tachibana was not as Varian knew her, a frail old crone who was permanently hunched over. No, this was Chihiro in her prime, young and strong. Before Varian knew what was happening, Chihiro had thrown Varian to the ground and was crushing their neck in her hands. Varian grappled at Chihiro's wrists, trying to break her vice grip, or at the very least free up their own windpipe to say something, but nothing worked. Just when the corners of Varian's vision started to turn black, there was a painfully loud cracking sound. Chihiro's hands released Varian and she keeled over sideways. Varian sat up to see that she was dead, shot in the head by a laser weapon. "Bachan!" Varian shouted in Japanese. They tried to scramble on their hands and knees toward Chihiro, but Maui grabbed her, or him. "It's a trick!" Maui yelled above the din. "She's not real! None of them are!" The tables turned quickly. None of the attackers were armed and fought with their fists. The Stormbreakers, on the other hand, were carrying guns and swords and knives. One by one, the attackers were slain, and after a bloody fight, the 6 Stormbreakers stood over the broken forms of the enemy. "What?" Kingi panted. "What the hell is all this? That guy died 50 years ago." He pointed at the corpse of Ripi Imvu. "And she bought the farm at the War in Heaven." He pointed to the body of Kailani Kalili. Varian was shaking, looking down at Chihiro. They had seen pictures of their grandmother as a young woman before, but to see her like this... It shook Varian's resolve very badly. But things only got worse. Right before everyone's eyes, the 6 corpses began to change. It was like watching a sped-up film of a tree growing. Bodies changed shape and size until the slain enemies were completely transformed. Now, the corpses of 6 different people were laid out on the ground for the Stormbreakers to see. Inez Espinosa, Sarah Roberts, Lawrence Ridge, Jay Lansing, Piper Russell, and Cassandra. They had all died the same way, shot multiple times in the chest, as though they were executed by a firing squad. This was too much for Setla. The giant reptile fell to his knees and began to weep. The other 5 Stormbreakers moved to console him. "The others, I can accept," Setla sobbed. "But the little one, not the little one. No." "We won't let it happen," Corder reassured him. "That's why we're here." It took some time for the team to get moving again. Varian and Setla in particular were quite shaken up. Corder and Maui hung back to give them shoulders to lean on, while Nainu and Kingi led the way, moving deeper into the Crystal Palace. It was getting easier to navigate now, as Nainu figured out how to recognize the difference between an illusion and the actual path forward. He was just starting to regain his confidence when Nainu walked headlong into a wall. "Now what?" Kingi groaned. It was a dead end. The path simply stopped, leaving mirrors to the front, left, and right. Nainu cautiously looked around while Kingi raised his laser rifle. "I'm gonna blast through," he declared. Kingi fired 2 rounds into the mirror directly in front of him. But nothing happened. The reflective glass simply absorbed the laser bolts, leaving no sign of damage. Kingi roared and tried to smash the mirrors, only to be frustrated. His pride injured, Kingi stepped aside as Setla took his place. "It can't be that hard," Setla said. And with that, the 500-pound Mycor thundered forward and threw himself against the mirror. With a jarring crash, Setla stumbled backward, stunned. He did not even leave a mark on the glass. Setla sat down next to Kingi, head in hands. I don't understand," he said. Nobody did, and for about 10 minutes, the Stormbreakers were stuck. Everyone tried forcing the mirror, until Nainu stood in front of it, glaring at his own reflection. Then his eyes widened. "Of course," he said. "It all makes sense." Everyone looked at Nainu. "The mirror doesn't shatter because it's not there," Nainu declared. "It's impossible for a flimsy piece of glass to stand up to Setla, so that means it's an illusion." "Illusions are mind tricks," Corder said. "That's a solid object, Nainu." "No, it's not," Nainu replied. "Stop believing it's real, and it just disappears." Then Nainu stepped through the mirror and vanished. The other 5 Stormbreakers jumped in fright. Nainu had left no mark on the mirror, and there were no lights or sounds to accompany his sudden departure. He had simply vanished. Varian looked at the mirror too, and then he, or she, smacked themselves in the forehead. "I really am an idiot," Varian said. "I gotta trust Nainu more often." And Varian stepped through the mirror as casually as one steps across a room. One by one, all of the Stormbreakers followed, each one in an increasing state of astonishment. They were in a chamber, unlike anything else in the Crystal Palace. While the rest of this place was bright and vibrant, this place was dark and foreboding. A door could be seen at the far side. Like the rest of the building, it was made of frosted glass, and shapes could be seen moving on the other side. Someone was pacing back and forth in the next room. As for this chamber, there was no feature of interest. Just like the maze outside, The walls, ceiling, and floors were all made from mirrors. Cautiously, the team advanced across the wide open chamber. But just as they made it halfway, they were stopped by a voice. It was the very same voice the team had heard before, that of a woman. "You have entered the Chamber of Death. The next room is your destination, the Chamber of Life. The door is locked." The voice fell silent. Corder quickly sprinted across the room and tried the door. Sure enough, it was barred. And as the rest of the team approached, Corder stared hard at the door and then tried to walk through it. She bounced off the glass and fell back into Varian's arms. "It was worth a shot," she grumbled. "I think we'll have to play whatever game the demented voice wants to play," Maui said. Reluctantly, Maui aimed his voice at the ceiling and said, "Tell us how to unlock the door. Please?" The woman's voice replied immediately. "The door will open when one among you volunteers to be sacrificed. Those of you who remain will proceed to the Chamber of Life and reap the benefits of your comrade's death." Kingi dropped his rifle. "No!" Maui shouted. "We are not letting you kill one of us!" The 6 Stormbreakers huddled up in the center of the room, keeping their backs to one another and looking for any sign of a lethal ambush. No one was stepping forward to volunteer. "Very well," the disembodied voice replied. "You are, of course, free to depart the way you came in." A light emanated from the trick mirror the team had just passed through. Suddenly, the Stormbreakers were able to see through it to the other side. As for what they saw, there was movement. Because the Crystal Palace was seemingly made from mirrors, it was possible to see just about anything that even slightly moved. Varian narrowed their eyes at a flurry of color swiftly moving across the glass panels. A green cape with gold trimming could be seen. Aaron Hyatt was inside the Crystal Palace, along with a few members of the progeny. "Oh no!" Kingi gasped. "Hyatt's still after the..." Everyone looked at the doorway to the Chamber of Life. They could see a humanoid shape pacing around through the glass. "The prisoner!" Varian gasped. "That's the source of power Hyatt wants. The person in there is gifted. Find a way to force the door." The Stormbreakers sprang into action. Everybody brought his or her weapons to bear against the glass, but nothing worked. Laser weapons were no good, so Corder hacked and slashed at the door with her plasma sword until it broke. Setla slammed headfirst into the door to no effect. Meanwhile, Aaron Hyatt had reached the trick mirror. Varian could see her through it. Kingi and Maui took up defensive positions by the trick mirror, waiting for Hyatt to pass through it. The situation was so desperate that for a fraction of a flicker of a moment, Varian seriously considered volunteering for whatever fate the ghost voice was planning. Varian would have volunteered, but they hesitated a moment too long. Nainu threw his weapon down and declared in a defiant voice, "Fine then, take me!" The 5 remaining Stormbreakers objected simultaneously. "Nainu!" Corder called out. "What are you doing?" "You're at the end of the Psionic prison," Nainu said. "You don't need me anymore. And what good will a tiny translator be after this anyway? Get to the next chamber and save the prisoner. Don't let Hyatt get there first." Nainu shook his fist at the ceiling and called out to the disembodied voice. "Can you hear me? If it gets my friends through that door and saves a life, then I'll volunteer for your sick game. Take me and do your worst, but you let my friends go." The reply was short. "So be it." It happened instantly. There was a powerful crash like an explosion. Maui, Setla, Corder, Varian, and Kingi were all struck blind and deaf before being knocked to the ground by a shockwave. A moment later, the Stormbreakers found their eyesight and hearing returned. The doorway to the Chamber of Life was open, and Nainu Dokunle was lying flat on his back, arms stretched out on either side, and a final expression of defiant rage etched on his face. Nainu's eyes were unfocused and glassed over. He was dead.